A good vach. Shavua Tov. Wishing you all a good, no, cancel that. A great week. May you all, my holy brothers and sisters, be blessed with a great week. These days, great weeks have seemed to be few and far between, but attitude goes a long way. And if we find those silver linings, if we, look for what to be grateful for, even in this difficult time, we will find, or we will make what to be grateful about, right? And I had, before Shabbat began yesterday, we had a Zoom with members of our family in, I think there were 5 different cities represented in that Zoom call. And that wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't be Zooming together as we get ready for Shabbos with disparate, far-flung members of our family. But for this current situation, and it was beautiful. It was so meaningful to see these relatives, to hang out with them for a while before Shabbat began. Special shout out to my cousin Horatio for putting that together. It's just tremendous. So we can find what to be grateful for. And if we can't find it, we can make what to be grateful for. And that's a good lesson for all of us. Atsovenio says, good Shabbos. Did I see that? From Finland? That's awesome. Beautiful. It's so great to have you in from Finland. Steph Holland in Baltimore. Joyce Noach says, Boker Tov from Amsterdam. Must be Sunday morning over there. How cool is that? It's so great to be with you, part of this worldwide community. And let me just mention again, tomorrow, Sunday, at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and whatever that translates to, I think it's 8 o'clock London, 9 o'clock Paris, 10 o'clock Israel. We're going to be doing our first Accidental Talmudist Zoom forum. And it'll be great. I hope you can join us. It's posted in the timeline. We'll post it again tomorrow morning. Are you in the Accidental Talmudist Forum? You should be, right? If you're part of this class, you should certainly be part of the forum. That's our Facebook group. There's a post about it there. We're also sending out the email. Are you on our email list? You should be. You can sign up for the email. Just make a note for later at accidentaltalmudist.org. And there's a sign-up form there to be on our email. We usually send out about 1 email a week, sometimes less. Okay. We're holding by page 50. What a nice page number to have reached. We're holding page 50 in Tractate Shabbos. We're studying the 3rd Mishnah. But before we get into that, let us count the Omer. We are in the Omer period. We're counting 50 days, another use of 50, between Passover, Pesach, and Shavuos. So we count every day in this period because we're commanded to. And it's also a spiritual practice, right? That vision of ourselves that we had during Passover, free of the destructive behaviors which enslave us. Every day we consider another aspect of how we're making our progress toward becoming free of that behavior. I personally, I'll just share, I'm working on a type of procrastination that I do from time to time. And I'm working on that every day. And so as I run the Counting the Omer through the Sephiros, right? So we look at, in these 7 weeks, we focus first on Chesed, which is loving kindness, then on Gevura, which is firmness, restraint. Now we're in the 3rd week. We're focusing on Tiferes, which is like harmony and balance. And each day we go through the same sort of emotions and looking at that emotional aspect of that bigger emotional theme and asking, okay, this new me, right, when I don't do this kind of procrastination, this particular type that I do, when I'm not going to do that anymore, what's going to motivate me? How am I going to organize myself? How is it going to change so that I don't have that problem anymore? What systems am I going to put in place so that I outgrow that immature behavior, right? And this is a beautiful time, not just for self-reflection, self-reckoning, and doing better, but getting organized about it, crying out to God for help in that process, etc. That's a way to not just count the Omer, fulfill that mitzvah, but to have it make a transformative, beautiful difference in my life. And if I improve something about myself, right, which is a negative, self-destructive thing, invariably it's going to be a blessing to the people that I care about, right? I'm going to be more like that man or woman that I want to be one day, more that mensch. And if you're more of a mensch, of course it's going to be better for the people around you. So let us count the Omer. I am prepared and ready to fulfill the positive commandment of counting the Omer. As is written in the Torah, you shall count 7 complete weeks from the day following the Passover rest day. And we do this at night when the new day begins. That's why I'm doing it now. Normally I haven't been doing it on the show because we do it during the day, but it's a nighttime show, so I'm counting. When you brought the Omer as a wave offering to the day of the 7th week, you shall count 50 days. Then you shall present a meal offering of new grain to the Lord. May the pleasantness of the Lord our God be upon us. Establish for us the work of our hands. Establish the work of our hands. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has made us holy through his commandments and has commanded us about counting the Omer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al sefiras haomer. Today is the 17th day of the Omer, making 2 weeks and 3 days of the Omer. Hayom shiva asar yom shehem shnei shavuos ushlosha yamim la Omer. And today we meditate on Tiferes Shebetiferes. And that's counting the Omer. All right, let's get back to our journey through the Talmud on the Daf Yomi cycle. As I said before, we are on page 50 in the second volume of the Talmud, which is Shabbos. We're now in chapter 4, and we're looking at the 3rd Mishnah. So generally speaking, right now we're back on the subject of cooking for Shabbos, but as we see, even though that's the general subject, there's all these principles that we've now put into play as we journey through Tractate Shabbos, and they keep coming up again and again, right? Like intentional and unintentional, right? When you do a permitted labor, but it causes an unintentional violation of a prohibited labor, are we liable for that? That's the conflict between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Is an item muktzeh, right? So does it have a legitimate use on Shabbos? If the answer is no, then most likely that object is muktzeh and we can't even touch it on Shabbos. And the whole idea that since we can't kindle fire and we can't cook, we want to make sure that we don't do activities that will lead to somehow either kindling or extinguishing a flame or cooking, even if we didn't mean to cook. So these are the kinds of principles that keep coming up in our analysis. All right, now looking at the 3rd Mishnah. Yesterday we learned the first part of this Mishnah that if a person uses hides, right, like cow hides, for example, and you know, around LA, not anymore, but it used to be that you could drive on certain streets, and on Saturday and Sunday there'd be a guy selling animal hides. I think they were real, right? And so usually cow hides, sometimes other animals. And you could buy it and use it as a rug in your house. So, you know, you're familiar with animal hides. Now, you could use an animal hide to insulate a pot on Shabbos. Why would you do that? Because you heated it up before Shabbos began, and now you want it to help keep the pot hot so that you can have a hot dinner when you finally get around to eating dinner. And we learned that the hide is generally not muktzeh, right? That the hide, we just assume that it has a legitimate use on Shabbos because you might want to sit on it, or you might want to cover yourself on it, or you might want to use it to insulate the pot, and so you can move it around. Let me just adjust this. Okay. So now the second part of the Mishnah, and then we learned that there's an exception for a craftsman who deals in leather, right? Or a tanner. So somebody who uses those animal hides professionally. So that person would have a different relationship with the hides in or around his house. For that person, we would assume that that hide is for a professional purpose and he doesn't want it used on Shabbos for some non-standard use of the hide. For him, those hides are to be, turned into wallets, turned into sandals, whatever he does with that, and he would be very particular and careful about the hide, and so we would assume that those hides are not prepared for use on Shabbos, since in his world, hides are only associated with his professional work. And on Shabbos, of course, there's no professional work. Now we go to the second part of this Mishnah, and we deal with a person who insulated his cooking pot with fleece, right? Fleece is the cuttings of wool from a sheep, right? So let's say that, you have a farm, and so many of these rules, right, were created in a time, were given by God, and then augmented by the sages, or explained by the sages, interpreted by the sages so that we could apply them properly in a time when the primary job was agricultural. Of course, there were people in cities, and, and there were rabbis, and there were doctors, and healers, and other kinds of people, but most people, lived on a farm of some kind or owned fields, were involved with agriculture in one way or another. So it's pretty common for people to have sheep, and they might have sheared the sheep, and now they've got some fleece, right? Either it could be in the form of a sheep hide, but I think here what we're really talking about is they've sheared the sheep, so it's just the cuttings of the wool off the sheep, off the hair of the sheep, off the sheep, but it hasn't been spun into thread or wool to be turned into woolen garments, right? It's just the raw wool cut off the sheep. So the question is, can we insulate the pot with that, right? And what we hear about fleece is interesting. In the Mishnah, the fleece is distinguished from the hide. First of all, like the hide, we can insulate the pot with it. All right, so it's not one of those substances like manure or the residue from an olive press, which are understood to generate some heat inside through a chemical process, either reacting with moisture or having a fermentation going on inside that would add heat to the pot. And then they would be disqualified for use in insulating the pot because of the restriction on cooking during Shabbos. So fleece is okay from the perspective of adding heat. But whereas with the hides, the default assumption is that they are not muktzeh, and so we can wrap the pot in the hide, unwrap the pot, take the pot out, serve out some food, put it back, and then wrap it up again. With the cowhide, with the fleece, according to the Mishnah, not so simple. Because it may be that even though you insulated the pot with this fleece on Friday afternoon, once Shabbos comes in, the fleece may indeed be muktzeh. And then and so what the Mishnah says, I'll just read it to you. This Mishnah was back on page 49. So the Mishnah says, so too may one insulate food in wool fleece. And in contrast to the hides, one may not move the fleece. How then does one act if he insulated food in fleece and now wishes to remove the pot? He lifts the cover, which he is permitted to move because it's the cooking pot. You can use it. It's prepared for Shabbos because you got to get the food out of it to serve your guests. And the fleece falls by itself. He need not even touch it. Why would he not touch it? Because in this case, the fleece is muktzeh, right? At least it's the assumption this far in the Mishnah. Now, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says if he placed the pot in a basket filled with fleece, he leans the basket on its side so that the fleece will fall to the side and he takes the pot. Otherwise, there is concern lest the wool collapse when he lifts the pot from the basket, and then he will be unable to replace the pot, right? Because the fleece is muktzeh. You can't touch the fleece, and now that it's moved, it's like, that's it. You can't put the pot back in. But the rabbis disagree and say he may take the pot and afterward replace it. So now we see what the rabbis are saying is, yeah, the fleece is muktzeh, but you don't have an intention to touch the muktzeh. You just have the muktzeh fleece. Your intention is just to take the pot out and put the pot back. Why is it that you can take the pot out and put the pot back, even though it will necessarily dislodge some of the fleece, which was used to insulate the pot? Because the rabbis hold, like Rabbi Shimon, that the unintentional moving of this muktzeh, right, which is you're unintentionally violating a rabbinic decree. Muktzeh itself is a rabbinic decree. Because it's unintentional and it is not inevitable, therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can take the pot and put it back. Moving the pot around is permitted. The fact that you're going to dislodge some of that fleece, which you otherwise shouldn't touch, it was an unintentional side effect of taking the pot. But it was not inevitable. It wasn't a sure thing that you were going to dislodge some of the fleece. It might just hold its place. Therefore, the rabbis hold, like Rabbi Shimon, you can move the pot, you can put it back. However, this is not where the halacha, where the law ultimately comes out. Because ultimately the rabbis, after the Mishnah, right, the rabbis of the Gemara, the rabbis of the Talmud, a little bit later, looked at this question more carefully, and they said, well, actually, we're not going to assume that fleece is muktzeh. We're going to actually put it in almost the same category as hides. And we're going to assume that people have in mind generally that they might use fleece for something on Shabbos. What might they use it for? Maybe they're just going to put it on the bed to lie on. Maybe they're going to put a bunch of it together and use it as a pillow. Maybe a lot of people started using it as an insulating substance, and it was almost like a default position that fleece was used for insulation. So most people would have in mind that fleece is going to be used on Shabbos. It wasn't set aside, and the halacha became that in the default position on the subject of shearings, right, wool shearings, the fleece from a sheep, it is not muktzeh. People do assume that it has a permitted use on Shabbos. They have that in mind generally. They don't even have to form that specific thought. When is fleece, when is it the case that fleece is muktzeh? Can you guess? Can you guess when fleece is muktzeh? If it's similar to the principle with the cowhides? The professional, right? So if you've got somebody who's in the business of making wool products, if you've got somebody who uses wool to make garments or to make prayer shawls, or who spins it into thread, or who uses it to stuff pillows, which he sells, whatever his reason is, and there are a lot of people who are involved in the wool business in one way or another. So for that person, we assume that he's particular about his fleece. He wouldn't want it used on Shabbos for some other purpose than what he uses it for professionally. And so the default position for that person is that it's muktzeh. So then the question is, but that person, can he use it to insulate his pot? Yes, he can. He has to designate it to have a Shabbos purpose, right? And then he can use it for other things on Shabbos. It's not going to be muktzeh. So the question becomes, okay, in the situation where something is muktzeh, right? Like in this case, fleece or hides for a professional who works with those things. But he wants to designate it that it's going to be able to be used on Shabbos for one thing or another. So what does he have to do, or what does she have to do in order to designate this thing as having a legitimate Shabbos use for him or herself? What do they have to do? Do they just think it? Do they have to take an action? Do they have to make a declaration? How do we stipulate that something that would otherwise be muktzeh and therefore not permitted to touch or move during Shabbos will have that Shabbos use and will be available for whatever we need it for? So, to learn a little bit about how we designate, hold on a second. The question is, how do we designate for Shabbos, right? Now, what's interesting here is you would think, well, if he insulated his pot with it on Friday afternoon, he clearly intended it to have a use on Shabbos. So isn't that enough? Hasn't he designated it to have a Shabbos use because he insulated the pot that he's cooking a Shabbos dinner in? Answer, no. Because in this Mishnah, we see that there is a way to have the pot insulated with fleece, even if it remains muktzeh, because he just takes the pot out without touching the wool and doesn't do anything else with the wool. He can't move it, he can't rearrange it, he can't do that. He could just take the pot out and put the pot back. So just the fact that he insulated, not enough. Okay, so what else would be a reasonable way to stipulate that, no, I'm going to use this on Shabbos and I want it to have a legit use on Shabbos? Okay, so we're going to learn how to designate something for use on Shabbos from the example of firewood. In this case, firewood made from date palms. So if you take, if a person has date palms at a date palm tree, it's been cut down, sawed into pieces, and he's keeping it around for firewood, right? So, and a lot of people now, especially if you live in the north or in the east, right, you have a firewood pile, you have a wood pile, right? Certainly 100 years ago, everybody had a wood pile, no matter where in the United States you live, because it was just common to heat homes. I mean, if you didn't live in the city, but even in the city, some people would have a wood pile, right? Okay, so firewood, as we can imagine, is muktzeh. What are you going to do with firewood on Shabbos that is a permitted use of firewood? The main use of firewood is to burn it in a fire. That you cannot do on Shabbos, right? You cannot add wood to a fire because you're kindling something that wouldn't be burning otherwise. So it has no legit use as firewood on Shabbos. But what if we're sort of living in a more nomadic type of society? People don't have like so much furniture. They don't have so many chairs. There's going to be a party, perhaps a wedding feast, perhaps a funeral, and people are going to be coming from a great distance to be here. And there's going to be a lot of people here. And what we actually need is places for them to sit. So this firewood might actually be quite handy as providing places for people to sit. If we're all sitting on the ground anyway, now suddenly a log of firewood becomes quite attractive as a place to sit down. But if we didn't stipulate that firewood was going to be used as a chair on Shabbos, it would remain muktzeh and it wouldn't be available for us to use on Shabbos. So somehow we need to stipulate that the firewood is for use on Shabbos. And we learned a bunch of different cases, and just to sum it up, the rules come out like this. If on Friday afternoon we sit on some of that firewood, we go out and sit on it, okay, so now you have stipulated that the firewood is usable as a place to sit and that's your intent on Shabbos, right? Because you did it on Friday afternoon, clearly, why did you do that? You went out and sat on it for a moment to make a clear, demonstrable action that you want to use that firewood as a chair on Shabbos. So sitting on it on Friday afternoon, check. That renders it not muktzeh. Number two, if you go out and tie the branches, and you can imagine these palm branches, so they're probably not so thick, right? So they're like maybe this thick, something like that, maybe like that. Not a great chair, but you take 3 of those and tie them together, especially if they're cut the same length. Now you've got something spectacular, right? You've got a little stool that you could put up on end and have a nice little platform, right? Sort of like a triangular platform of the 3 branches tied together. So if you tie the palm branches into bundles, well, now for sure you've taken an action and it's clear that you did that because you want to turn them into chairs that you can use on Shabbos. So tying into bundles, check. Now the wood is not muktzeh. Is it enough to say to yourself, on Shabbos, I'm going to sit, or I'm going to invite people, I'm going to allow people to sit on those, on those logs, those firewood logs. Is that enough? Yes. Yes, it is enough to have a conscious intention. It is enough to have a conscious intention. Now here we see a kind of law that is quite different from laws in the culture, right? Like if you don't pay your taxes and the IRS shows up and says, hey, why didn't you pay your taxes? Well, then the old excuse offered by the comedian Steve Martin, I forgot, will not get you out of jail. And the fact that you say, I meant to, I 100% had it in mind that I was gonna pay my taxes, but I forgot. So the IRS is gonna put you in jail anyway. But if you meant to have that firewood available for you and your guests to sit on during Shabbos, and during the week you said, I want those logs to be chairs come this Shabbos, yes, you will be believed on Shabbos when you tell your guests, I formulated a specific intent during this week that we could sit on them. And not only that, but if you intended to sit on them during the week, and you didn't even do it, but you thought, yeah, I'm going to go sit on that, but then somebody called and you went somewhere else, but you already changed your mental picture of what those logs are from simply firewood to firewood or maybe a chair, then that's enough and you could sit on it on Shabbos. So muktzeh, as we see, is, it's a rabbinical decree that's complicated and exacting, but they weren't harsh with it. Right? Our sages were not harsh about this, as long as you can legitimately say that I thought about using them as chairs, then they're going to be available to you on Shabbos. And likewise, right, fleece, we just assume that everyone might use it as an insulator, and it has a prepared use for Shabbos. But even the professional who uses the wool as part of his job, as part of his manufacturing for whatever it is that he makes, he can just consciously think to himself, I'm going to use this stuff on Shabbos, or I'm going to use it for insulating a pot, and that's enough. Then that object is prepared for use on Shabbos. Now, not all the sages agreed with this. Rabbi Hanina ben Akiva disagreed. And so there was an incident where he was at an event where people came in from a long distance. And the one recounting it was Zeri, and Zeri couldn't remember, not Zera, this is another sage, Zeri. And Zeri couldn't remember if it was a wedding or a funeral, okay? It didn't matter, because what we understand from the fact that it was either a wedding or a funeral is that the people who were there were preoccupied, right? And so Rabbi Zeri said to his, it's not Zeri, Hanina ben Akiva said to his students, right, because he brought a little delegation, right, him and his students went, and they were part of this larger gathering, and he realized that they were going to need chairs, more chairs than were present. So he said to his students, hey, go out and sit on all those pieces on all those logs. Just go out and sit on the logs, right? And why? Because it would have been preferable for him that they be tied into bundles, a much more concrete and demonstrable action that would physically turn those logs into chairs, tie them into bundles. He would have preferred that. But because people were busy with the preparations, whether it was a funeral or a wedding, that just was not realistic. They weren't going to go out and tie them into bundles. But at least his students could go out and sit on a bunch of these logs, and now they would be rendered non-muktzeh and available not only for him and his students, but for all the people who were assembled there. But the law is not, according to Hanina ben Akiva, it is enough to have that conscious stipulation in your mind that you're designating that this object, which normally has no Shabbos use, will have a permitted use on this Shabbos. that's what I've got for us today. I'm just looking through the comments. Josh Diaz says he had a Zoom Seder, one of the beautiful things that has come up during this period. What else do we have here? Are there any questions or comments? Magpie says, am I the only one on the West Coast? Vegas here. Well, Mag, yeah, I'm here in LA, so I'm with you. And so is Melissa Oppenheimer-Friedman. She's out here on the West Coast. Great Neck is in the house, I see. Hinda Eder says, Midwood in the house. Beautiful. All right, that's what I've got for us today. Fantastic to see you all. Miriam Yerushalmi, fantastic to see you here. Miriam is a gifted writer and teacher, and we sometimes have her as, well, she's a regular contributor to the Table for Five. You guys should always watch out for that. We usually put it out on Wednesday. 5 talented writers commenting on one verse from that week's Torah portion. And this coming week, I'm going to be one of those writers. Usually not. I'm usually just the editor. But I will be contributing to the verse this week's. So watch out for that on Wednesday. My friends, it's great to see you. May you be blessed as we began tonight, not just with a good week, but a great week. And it's possible. And if you don't find something, you don't see something to make it a great week, make something that'll make it a great week. All the best, my holy brothers and sisters.